All right, it's right at 1 o'clock, and we've got 86 people on the Zoom webinar and growing. So let's go ahead and get started. We've got an hour set aside for this first presentation today. I'm Cliff Smart. I don't know if I think we're all looking at the screen here of slides, but this is our first webinar in the new long-range plan development process, and we will be focusing on the future and visioning what higher education could look like in the next decade and beyond, and what that could mean for Missouri State University. We've got a web page set up for, you can go to the long range plan website, and then in one of the clicks is developing a new long range plan. And that is going to be one of our major focuses for the coming year. We've put a steering committee together to help us through that. And so that steering committee for the development of our long-range plan will be co-chaired by Sean Wall, the Dean of the Reynolds College of Arts and Letters, and Suzanne Shaw, our Vice President for Marketing and Communication. Suzanne and Sean, thanks for volunteering for this really important job over the coming 9 months. Other members of the steering committee include Brad Bodenhausen, Lyle Foster, Doug Guzet, Blake Haynes, our Student Government Association Vice President, Catherine Jolivet, Cameron Labar, Elizabeth Roselle, Mark Smith, Rebecca Stewart, and Barry Tinkler. And that group will report out to an executive leadership team consisting of Frank Einhelig, Dee Cisco, Jim Baker, and myself. So, so I said this is going to be the first of several visioning sessions. We have 3 more that will occur through October, early November, where we explore academics, globalization, and campus climate. So more to come on that. Our goal is to have a new long-range plan for the board to vote on at its June meeting next summer, and there's lots of work to do between now and then. Some of you may be wondering, is this a good time to do a long-range plan in the middle of a pandemic? And my answer to that is absolutely. Our leadership team visited about this on the administrative and academic side. We visited about this with the board. So much of the world has changed in the last 7 months. I actually think it's the perfect time for us to be thinking about the future. What do we learn from changes to higher education, to changes in our world? We're in year 5 of our current long-range plan, and I think it also gives us something to focus on besides the virus, every single minute of every single day. And so I hope you're excited about this. I know I am. I know Sean and Suzanne are as well. And to help lead us through this, we have our consultants at EAB, and we have 3 of them on the call today. David Addis, whom you have interacted with before, Paul Gunther, who's our Missouri State contact, and then Dr. Rachel Tanner will be guiding us through our work today. And so I'm going to read a piece of her background, and then Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you to lead the rest of the meeting. So here goes. Rachel is a director in EAB's Research Advisory Services, working in the strategic strategy team to provide decision support for partner institutions around challenges in academic affairs, strategy, and student success. During her years at EAB, Rachel's work has largely focused on questions of how institutions can remain relevant for future students and she is specialized in teaching presidents, chief strategy officers, and provosts how to use futurist methodologies to think more boldly about the future. That's our goal today, folks, is to begin to think more boldly, to think bigger about the future. Rachel holds a PhD in literature and rhetoric from the University of Oregon and master's and bachelor's degrees from the NYU system. Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, President Smart. Thanks for that great introduction and for teeing me up perfectly. So yes, welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for taking this hour out to spend a little bit of time learning how to think like a futurist. And if you have not heard of this term of, futurism, futurist thinking, and you're like me, as soon as President Smart said it in my bio and you saw it on the slide, you're like, that is not a thing. It is a thing. It's actually a field of study and practice that mixes together business strategy and forecasting with design and storytelling and cognitive psychology and behavioral economics to help orient people toward a sort of future horizon, develop the patterns of thinking, habits of mind that help you be bolder future thinkers. And because it's so interdisciplinary, I think that it's just a really great fit for folks in a university community to come together and use these skills, these methodologies, to spend time thinking about what the future of the institution should be, what the future of higher ed should be, and what is the future that we want to be active in creating. So that's what we're going to be spending a little bit of time on today. I want to I'll take 2 minutes to talk a little bit about EAB. We are a research and tech services firm. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia. We work primarily with higher education. 4-year higher education is sort of our bread and butter, though we do work with schools in K-12, with 2-year colleges, all the way through the student journey to graduate and adult learning and employer partnerships. We are proud that Missouri State is a global research partner, which means that we are sort of your thought partners and research librarians when it comes to strategy at every level, whether it's institutional strategy like we're talking about today, or academic strategy, IT strategy, business strategy, facilities, student affairs, all of the different functions across campus that help you do such a great job at working with your students, being a community of thinkers and leaders and innovators. So that's what we are, who we are. I am zooming at you from DC, which is my home, and my 2 colleagues here are, I don't know, they're roughly located around me somewhere here. But let me tell you who they are too. President Smart gave me a great introduction of who I am. And then of course I am joined by David Addis, who I know works with Missouri State quite a lot. He's up the street in Silver Spring, or as you can see in the map behind him. And he'll be piping up to have some conversations with me throughout this session. And then Paul Gunther, as well, as President Smart said, he is your day-to-day contact, your strategic leader for all things Missouri State and EAB together. And you're in Philly, right? Still, Paul?
I am.
All right. So we have the whole Mid-Atlantic region represented here. And I love that there are a lot of things about technology in the pandemic that are exhausting. But I really love that it's so easy for us to all come together, and with more than 100 of you all in a place that feels really intimate on our little screens here. So to take advantage of the power of the internet and make this conversation feel as much like a conversation as it can, given the size of the audience, I've got a little bit of a trick up my sleeve using a software that's called Poll Everywhere. Normally, if I had a chat box, which I don't in a webinar, I would give you a clickable link. So I apologize, I can't have you click this link, but I would love for you all to go to this website right here, pollev, POLLEV.com/EAB900. It also works on your phone. And then when you get there, there's a couple of things you got to click. I apologize for that. I can't get rid of them. Agree to cookies, no need for notifications. You do not need to enter your name. And you will see a question pop up for you to answer. And we're going to use this website throughout the session to gather some responses from you throughout. So keep this website open, and then occasionally it'll flash and give you a new question to answer. So let's see if you all go into polev.com/EAB900 right now. I've got a warm-up question because, as President Smart said, we're thinking about the next decade or so today as we talk about future visioning. So I want to get a kind of baseline from you all. How often do you think about the future 10 years from now? It's kind of a weird number, but let's say 2030, nice round numbers this year. How often does your mind wander to what 2030 will contain for you, for the people around you? While you guys are all answering, I'm gonna poke at my colleagues here. So, hey, David, how often do you think about the future 10 years from now?
I just realized, as you said, I thought of myself as not quite a futurist, but somebody who thinks about the future a lot. But really, I don't think about 2030 more than a couple times a year. I mean, I might draw charts that go out with projections, but I'm not actually thinking about what day-to-day life would look like that often.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I think it can feel like there's a right answer to this question. There's really not. And you and I are people who talk to higher ed leaders about the future quite a lot. But I have to admit that I don't naturally, if it weren't my job to kind of push people to think about the future in sessions like this, I think maybe once or twice a year too, for me. My brain doesn't sort of naturally go there. How about you, Paul? I know as a parent of young children, often those folks start thinking about the future 10 years out of self-preservation.
I actively try not to think about it, Rachel. I can't imagine, being 50 years old and then trying to figure out what that's going to look like, and kids getting ready to go off to college. So, as much as I would try not to think about it, I actually fall more in the monthly category.
Yeah.
For me, thinking about the future and forecasting actually helps me to prioritize now. So I'm probably more in that monthly bucket. It is where my mind goes a little more naturally.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you are not alone, because that seems to be where our quorum is falling in the distribution right now. I will tell everybody that I picked this horizon of 10 years on purpose. So 10 years tends to be, for futurist thinkers, it has a nice sweet spot. It's a really kind of a nice place to place your brain and do these visioning activities, because 10 years out is far enough out that you can imagine getting beyond the things that stop change from happening right now. The political disagreements, the regulatory challenges, the things that are sort of plaguing us, real and metaphorical in the moment. In 10 years, we can imagine we're beyond those things, right? And kind of view a world where real change is possible. But at the same time, 10 years is not so far out that it feels like science fiction. There will probably not be flying cars 10 years, we can hope, but it's still a realistic horizon that we're working on. So 10 years is where it's our nice sweet spot for futurist thinking, and that's the horizon that we're going to be thinking about throughout this session today. So now our numbers have started to even out. It looks like the majority of you are living in this monthly camp, though we've got quite a lot in the couple times a year camp and in the weekly camp, and then quite a few in daily as well. I wanted to show you how you measure up too on this distribution. So take a good look at how Missouri State is measuring up here, because I'm going to flash forward to a more national picture. So Institute for the Future, which is a think tank, futurist think tank located in Silicon Valley, they did a pretty big survey with the same question about 1.5 years ago. They asked about 3,000, less than 3,000 American adults, the same question: how frequently do you think about the future 10 years out? And you can see the distribution looks more or less actually similar, though more adults, when you took this broad cross-section of the US, were in the rarely almost never camp, whereas you can see Missouri State definitely was pinging in the monthly camp. So on the whole, you all are thinking about this 10 years out future more frequently than most American adults. But what I think is really interesting and useful about this particular survey, and what I want you all to keep in mind, is that when they cut the data by age, when they started to look at it by different age groups, what they saw is that 75% of seniors were falling into this rarely and almost never. So this is why these buckets were a little bit larger on this national survey, is because there were a number of seniors who answered, and 75% of them fell into this range. And cognitive psychologists have a theory for why they think it is. That has to actually do with the way that the brain works. So the same parts of your brain light up when you think about the future and imagine what the future is going to be like, as light up when you think about a memory from the past. So thinking about the past and thinking about the future activates the same part of your brain. So just as when you age, your memory starts to fade and you gotta spend some time working on it. You do your Sudoku and your Lumosity puzzles. It also takes a regular practice, a conscious practice of thinking about the future in order to keep that part of your brain sharp so that you continue to do it. Because as you age, that prospective brain, that section, that kind of complex of different areas in your brain starts to fade and get weaker. And so as we age, we have to be even more conscious about how much future visioning work we do and what our practice of future visioning is. And it's even more important right now, too, given this particular environment, which futurists call a VUCA world. So VUCA, V-U-C-A, stands for these four words on the screen: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this term, this type of environment, the VUCA world, has been, it's been around for a while. It actually comes from the military, from the Army War College. This is what military leaders, a term that they coined to describe sort of the fogs of war. But the Harvard Business Review types picked it up about a decade ago and started to use it to talk about business and how, business is a VUCA world. And then there was quite a lot of conversation for about a decade about whether or not you can actually call one single environment VUCA, or whether these are four separate environments that, because we love a 2x2, we consultants, we actually define based on, number one, how knowable is your environment? So how well can you see the things that are coming across the horizon at you? And then number two, how well can you predict outcomes? How well do you know if you do X thing, that Y will happen? Arguably, before COVID, so as of the beginning of this calendar year, depending on your job and the kinds of work that you were probably living in the top layer of this 2x2. Things felt maybe volatile because there's a lot of information fluctuating, a lot of things changing really fast. Or maybe it was just the complexity. I think this is the world that I was definitely living in. Lots of information asymmetry, is trying to find all the right information. Everything is really interconnected and complex. But I would argue, despite this 2x2 conversation, that COVID has placed us back into a unified VUCA world. That if ever there were a truly VUCA environment, it is right now. It is volatile. It is uncertain, it is complex, and it is ambiguous, sort of all at once and every day. Information is changing. It's hard to know what we don't know right now, and everything is so complex and interrelated. Just try to have a conversation about, what kinds of protections we should be doing and prioritizing on campus right now, and you quickly realize how everything influences everything else. So futurist thinkers, in particular, there's one futurist thinker, his name's Bob Johansen. He used to be the director of the Institute for the Future and now actually teaches at Army War College. And he says that any VUCA world, any truly VUCA environment, you cannot be certain. Uncertainty is just not possible because you just don't know how exactly things are going to work next week, next year, in a couple of months. You cannot tell people we are very certainly going to do it this way next month in a VUCA world, right? I think all of you can probably identify with that right now. But because the human brain craves certainty, the people around you are going to look for whatever certainty they can latch onto in a lack of certainty from leadership. And so leaders, it's actually incumbent on leaders in a VUCA environment to, if they cannot provide certainty, to provide clarity. I cannot tell you how we are going to do things next week, next month, next year, but I can tell you where we are going. I can give you a very clear sense of what our direction is, and we can rally around that. And that helps mitigate this need for certainty that people are constantly expressing. Okay, so that is the general argument for why it's important to be doing future visioning, to be able to clarify and articulate that clarity of vision for the people who are in your organization, the people who you're leading. But actually, I want to belabor this why and give you a couple more arguments for why it's important to be doing future visioning. There's arguments from different arenas of thinking. So first of all, for those of you who are business strategists who are always looking for some numerical outcomes, I will say that one reason why futures thinking is important across every level of any organization is because it ensures organizational resilience. So in the higher ed sphere, one really good example of this has been Southern New Hampshire University. So Bob Johansen, who I just mentioned, started actually working with Clay Christensen, who was on the board at SNU, and Paul LeBlanc, their president, about 15 years ago. And Bob Johansen put together, did a bunch of futurist thinking with them, taught them how to think in this way, put together a custom forecast for what the future of SNHU could be. And ever since LeBlanc and Christensen, when he was still alive and working with them, have really used this type of thinking to figure out what is the path that SNU should be charting. And it's a very specific kind of path, but nobody can argue that it's not transformational, that in just a few years, as this quote said, SNU is transformed from a pretty unremarkable New England institution into one of the fastest growing not-for-profit online educators in the country. Their numbers are up, their revenue is up. It's been a modern success story in higher ed. But it's not just in higher ed, actually. There was a longitudinal study recently done by a number of researchers looking at about 40 multinational corporations, mid to large size, so all of them making over 100 million euro rather a year in revenue. And they went through each of these organizations and they measured or scored each of them on their maturity, their futurist maturity. How well are the skills and the sort of patterns of thinking, of futurist thinking, how well are they embedded and socialized around the entire organization? And then they watched each of those companies for about 5 years and measured their growth and their revenue growth. And what they saw was that on the whole, the organizations that scored the highest in their maturity, vigilant in their futurist thinking, they achieved a market cap growth of 200% higher on average than the rest of the group in the study. And so there's some evidence that doing this kind of work, embedding the culture of thinking in this way can really lead to long-term gains in your organization, whether it's a college or any other kind of organization. But it's not just about the bottom line. I also want to say that doing this kind of work is also about activism. It's about being change agents, claiming your agency over the future. The future is not written yet. Yes, there are going to be some things that happen that are outside of our control, but we have quite a lot of influence over what is going to happen in the future. And we should walk through our work, our jobs, our days together as a community, keeping in mind that we have that agency and using that to create the future that we want to create. And so that's what, when it comes to futurist thinking, there are quite a lot of benefits in general. I was talking about resilience, but also creativity, mental flexibility, which I've also discussed. But I also like this hope part, because man, do we need some hope these days. And I love this line from another futurist thinker, Anib Jain, who writes about how this work is not about predictions. This is not about saying the future will be X, it will be Y. This kind of thinking is about understanding and discussing and organizing your response to various prospective futures, hypothetical futures, and creating tools that connect our present selves and our future selves so that we can become more active participants in creating the future. So that's why we are doing this. That's why this is important work. But now for the what. So I'm not just like, okay, now you all need to be future thinkers, go forth all ye and prosper and think about the future. I actually do have several skills that are what I'm talking about when I'm talking about future thinking, or strategic foresight it's often called as well. And so as I said, this is a sort of area of study and practice. And so just like with any area of study, there are a number of different methodologies that people use, but for the most part, they boil down to these 4 skills. So identifying and interpreting signals of the future, gathering those signals together into forecasts, gathering your forecasts together into scenarios of plausible futures, and then making those scenarios feel more real to people by prototyping artifacts from those possible futures. And I'm just going to talk for a minute about what each of these things mean. So there was a science fiction writer in the 80s named William Gibson, who wrote that the future is here right now. It's just not very evenly distributed. And that's actually kind of a fundamental tenet of futurist thinking is, change doesn't just happen automatically. It starts in these pockets and corners of places and then builds more and more momentum and gets bigger and bigger. And so good futurist thinkers kind of walk through their daily lives almost like they're playing a Pokemon game, like gathering signals and thinking about them and analyzing them so that they are anticipating the kind of change that's going to be happening. So one skill of strategic foresight, almost like the building block skill, is to identify and interpret those signals, those things that are happening, specific examples of change that are happening right now that you could imagine getting bigger and more amplified in the future and tell you what the future is going to be like. And then forecast. So this is where, for those of you who might have been, trained in statistics, this taxonomy might get a little confounding for you. But when I talk about forecasts in future thinking, I'm not talking about economic forecasting. I'm not talking about projections. I am talking about forecasting in a more rhetorical sense, based on signals that you see, making statements about what the future will be that are bold, but lightly held. The purpose being to start a conversation about what the future will be. So I can just come out and say, in 2030, all college instruction will be done online. Now that's a future that I think we could all visualize right now. We've seen a move toward that future this year for, reasons, practical reasons. But there's a lot of reasons why it won't be that too. By coming out and stating it as a bold statement, I have opened up a conversation though. I have allowed you now to come back to me and say, well, okay, that's interesting, but, and we can have a discussion about, is this a possible future? And also, is this a future that we want to be a part of? Like, okay, sure, I can see that. But I want to play a part in making that not be a future that comes about. So that is forecasting. That's what forecasting and futurist thinking is. Then we have scenarios. So if a forecast is a snapshot of a possible future, like one part of it, a scenario is sort of your 3D goggle view of the future. It takes a lot of different forecasts and sews them together into a vision of what the future could look like, kind of 360 degrees. And futurist thinkers often make their scenarios, once you've written a scenario, you make it more concrete, easier for people to kind of wrap their brains around by prototyping an artifact from that future, some object or piece of literature, some sort of story or design from that future that again helps open the conversation, helps provoke discussion about what the future could be like and whether that is the right future for us. So these are the basic skills of strategic foresight. Today, for the rest of this session, we're going to work on this first set of skills. Like I said, they're sort of the fundamental building blocks of futurist thinking. So we're going to talk, I brought you a number of signals that my team has been looking at and paying attention to, and we're going to discuss those signals. And we're going to continue having discussions with other groups as we launch into this planning process that take advantage of all of these other skills of strategic foresight. And of course, I'm always happy to talk to anybody about these as well, or recommend further reading about how to do forecasting, how to write scenarios and prototype them. But any of the names that I've dropped along this presentation, you know, Bob Johansson, Anub Jain, these are all people who do this work every single day and are fascinating to pay attention to. But let's spend some time talking about signals. And this is where I'm going to start bringing you all more voices in, because you've heard me talk enough. But let me tell you first what I mean when I talk about signals. I mentioned it a little bit. I gave you that William Gibson quote, that the future is here, it's just not very evenly distributed. So like I said, a signal is a specific example, something real that's happening right now in the present, that tells you what the future could be like. And this takes a lot of different forms. It's sort of most easy to catch as a new technology, some headline you might see in like Wired magazine or something like that. So there's this headline I saw last year about 5G collars that allow cows to decide when they want to be milked. So you can sort of imagine if that were a thing that become more widely adopted, it would move us into a future where animals have more agency over how we work with them. It could be, a signal could be a scientific discovery or a breakthrough. It could be an emerging behavior. So something that you are seeing pop up around you more and more, and you think to yourself, that's a new way of doing things. So I often look to, Pew Research for these kinds of signals. Earlier in the summer, they put out a report about how millennials are less likely to live with a family of their own, meaning yourself plus spouse plus your kids in one family unit and domicile, that millennials are less likely to live like that in this age of life than previous generations in their 30s and early 40s. So millennials are more likely to cohabitate still with roommates, to cohabitate with other families, other full family units, or with extended family, grandparents, aunts and uncles, etc. And so you can imagine if this behavior became more widespread, that this maybe would move us into a future where what is considered a family, maybe even for tax purposes, would be more heterogeneous than we have ever thought about it before. So maybe, the dependents that you could claim would be more than just, your children. So that is another kind of signal. A signal could also be a new business model or a venture. This is another pretty common place where we see signals. This is where you open up the Wall Street Journal and it's talking about the Uber of blah, blah, blah. And you think, okay, well, what would blah, blah, blah be like if every company in that industry worked this way? And that's how you start to analyze those signals. But also, and this is a lesser one, it's harder to wrap your head around, but a signal could also be some new policy. So recently in California, they instituted a state law that bans bots from pretending to be human. So you could imagine that if this were a policy that were more widely adopted across the entire country, that this would be moving us into a future where there's more regulation of the way that AI interacts with us online. So as you've heard me talk about these signals, there's a certain kind of pattern of sentence I've been using, and that gets to the way that you should be analyzing signals as you see them. So if you come across something, I mentioned, headlines in Wired or in Wall Street Journal, or just behaviors that you observe, things that you see as you walk about your day where you're like, that is an interesting new kind of thing. You ask yourself, what would the world be like in 10 years if this thing got bigger, if it got more amplified, more widespread, more widely adopted, if everybody was doing it this way? What would that mean for me, but also what would that mean for society, for different stakeholder groups, for the way that things get done in our day-to-day lives? What kind of change also would that represent, from what kind of present to what kind of future? And then here's the agency part. Is this a signal that suggests a future that you want to help make? Do you want this future where animals have agency over how we work with them, or where people live in all kinds of different crazy family units, or where all of our cities are designed to withstand crazy, intense weather patterns? Are those futures that you want to be a part of? Or do you want to get out there? Do you want to get out there and organize to make that future come about? Or do you want to get out there and organize to make that, to stop that future from happening? Okay, so that's the work that we're going to be doing for the remainder of our time together. And I have 3 signals from higher ed that we have been paying attention to that I'm going to discuss with David and Paul, and then with all of you guys as well. So first, and the thing that I love about this work is that we can look for signals from all over the world. So we get to learn about innovations, not just in the US, but in other countries as well. And this first signal actually comes from Canada, from Ryerson University. And this is, I'm going to call it more of a business model kind of signal. It's the way that they do what they call zone learning. It's a model of doing the business of learning and community partnership in their general region. So the way that Ryerson sets up these zones, which are interdisciplinary learning, networking areas, is have physical locations. So little mini campuses all over the city. And each zone has a theme. So there's the biomed zone, the launch zone, the digital media zone, fashion zone, social ventures. And in each of these zones, which are physical places, you have co-located together faculty, classrooms, and offices for people who work in businesses in this field as well, all working together in one physical space. And the way that this works with students is that they are able to apply to a zone to start kind of learning in a zone. I believe it's their junior year. The zones are discipline agnostic. So I could be an English major and I could apply to go to the fashion zone. I could apply to work in the digital media zone or the legal zone. There's a lot of different areas depending on how I want to use my English degree that I could go to with to do some interdisciplinary work and thinking. And then once I get into that zone, I complete 4 semesters of coursework in that zone and like a capstone project. And then I also get to do these one-on-one idea consultations, like mentoring sessions, both with faculty who work in that area and with industry experts who are co-located in the zone. And then I get the specialization on my transcript, but I also get all of this network and I get all of this experience. And maybe I start a company. So that's happened quite a lot too through these zones, just to kind of give you a glimpse of the Legal Innovation Zone, which is has a partnership with LexisNexis, with Osler. And through this zone, they have initiated 19 ups, which are organizations that are collaborations between people who are doing work in this zone and thought, you know, wouldn't it be cool if we, and then they went and did it. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit from you, David, about this particular signal. I know, is there anything that you would add? I know that you have been talking about this signal actually for a long time. I sort of stole it from one of the presentations that you regularly give. So before I ask you the critical analysis questions, is there any information that you would add?
No, I think I just add that Ryerson's model, while maybe extreme in some ways, is not dissimilar from what we see at a lot of universities who have centers, they have cross-disciplinary programs. I think what I find fascinating is that for over 120 years, we've structured universities around academic disciplines housed in departments. And there were always some cross-cutting programs or research. But what we're hearing more and more is that students and faculty as well are spending more and more time in those areas between disciplines, or areas that bring disciplines together, in part because they can apply them to specific social engagement opportunities. And so when I think what would the world be like in 10 years, this gets amplified, I can imagine we would still have specialists in English literature or philosophy or sociology, but they might think of them, so they might even identify more with urban energy or legal innovation or social ventures. And they might spend more time collaborating with people from other areas of expertise than housed in a department with people with their same area of expertise.
Yeah, and I like that this is, like you're saying, there are bits of this model that we can see in all kinds of different ways in the way that a lot of universities run. I know that even Missouri State has the Idea Center, other, areas where interdisciplinary collaboration gets done in certain fields. But I like that it's almost like taking a research cluster or a research center on campus, sending it out into industry as well. And so I think I agree that this is an interesting way to think about how specialization can be done even beyond academic specialization. What else about Signal is interesting to you in terms of what kind of future it foretells? Any other parts of this that catch your interest?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the collaboration with industry. And here it's really more focused on industry. York University, also in Toronto, is more focused on social innovation. So it doesn't have to be for-profit. It's just the idea of engaging with communities outside the university. I think that has always been a part of what universities do, but it's becoming even more of a focus now, I think, as more students are passionate about seeing a way to engage in society, and even more members of the faculty also. But universities historically had kind of created the whole town gown distinction. That is, if not breaking down, it's become more porous than it was before. And again, if I'm thinking out 10 years from now, I could imagine faculty maybe even getting tenure for work they did through community engagement, as opposed to simply through a publication in a scholarly journal.
Yeah, that's interesting that your mind goes to ramifications for faculty and what faculty development could look like and how it could look different in 10 years. My brain always naturally goes to student recruitment. And I think about how, often the kinds of opportunities for extracurricular work or opportunities that exist, that's something that students don't often think about until grad school, right? You're like, oh, what kinds of internships, what kinds of clerkships, what kinds of ways can I build up my network in grad school? It's not always in your 18-year-old's mind, but I could see a world in 10 years if this model became more widespread, if many universities were doing these kinds of zones all over, that the way that I am thinking about what college I want to go to, it's not just what do I want to major in, what kind of social life do I want to have, but also what are the types of things I want to explore and have experience with? What kinds of networks do I want to be developing and trying out? And kinds of internships that I want to do. And we know that recruitment conversations are already starting to go that way. That families and students are bringing those kinds of questions about what internships can I do to the recruitment offices. But I think this will just really blow those ROI conversations into the next level. Hey, Paul, here's my question for you. Now that David and I have kind of chatted about what this future could look like, the next question that I pushed people to think about is does this tell of a future that you want to be an active part of? I'm interested in that from you. As David and I are talking about what this future could look like, are you like, man, sign me up? Or are you a little trepidatious about it? I see you kind of going like,
I waffle.
What do you think?
I go back and forth on it. That there's part of me, if I cast myself back to my own undergraduate experience and, 4 years on a quad, to your point earlier, would I have known enough then to kind of know what to sign up for? A testament to that, going into school, I was convinced I was going to be a Presbyterian minister afterwards. And I'm not a Presbyterian minister right now. But I like this idea of the zone as ways to engage and to test those things out within the confines of my undergraduate experience, instead of trying to figure out what that looks like afterwards, or maybe going on to get a graduate degree that wasn't the thing I wanted to do because I hadn't had that chance to explore in the same sort of way. So I'm intrigued by it. Would I be actively advocating for it, trying to bring it about? I'd probably be sitting on the sidelines and watching. I don't know if I'd be the activator on it.
Got it. So this is a future that you're on board with, but this is not your passion project.
I'm okay if it happens.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, you two. I wanted to have that conversation so that you all could start to see what these conversations are like. And now I'm going to give you another signal where I actually want you to be a part of that conversation. So I'm going to first activate a new question for you, because I'm going to tell you about this signal. And while I'm explaining it to you, I want you to go to that website again. If hopefully you didn't close your browser. If you did, it's pollev, POLLEV.com/EAB900. And this question, what would the world be like in 10 years if this signal gets amplified, is there for you to opine on as I tell you about this second signal. So this signal is from Australia, different country, and it's a different kind of signal. And I love talking about this signal with folks. I think Paul does too, because he's smiling. But so Deakin University in Australia, they have about 5 years ago, actually, so they're ahead of the tech curve here. They put together and launched this series of integrated technologies. It is, number one, their AI virtual assistant, which they call Genie. And then number two, their sort of campus navigation map, but it's like a smart map, and that is equipped with, or it pings geosensors that are planted all over campus. And then it uses those two pieces together to give nudges to students as they are walking around campus. If you imagine, it's like a combination of location-enabled Instagram ads and like Siri, or like your New York Times notifications, but like all put into the service of good, not evil. And by good, I mean student engagement. So, I could be walking around campus and I walk by the library and I get up, on my phone, it's like, hey, see, you're by the library. Don't forget you have library books due in 2 days. Or maybe I'm walking around campus trying to find a quiet place to study, or the opposite, something to do. And I get a notification telling me that there's going to be an event coming up. President Smart mentioned I went to University of Oregon, which I swear to you is the capital of the drum circle. And so you can imagine I'm walking past the amphitheater and it's like, drum circle right here in 45 minutes. And maybe that is something I want to be a part of. Maybe that is a reason I want to get away from this area, right? But like I would know based on what I'm doing around campus, what's happening around me. And there's quite a lot of pickup on this app, right? So some of you are like, it's a lot. But Genie has hosted 12,000 conversations on average every single day. Most of them are automatic. This is their chatbot conversations. If I get a buzz, that's like, oh, you have a book due in 2 days, I could respond and say, how do I renew it, right? And the chatbot can send me back the answer. But they also have had a lot of adoption. So 25,000 unique student users in 5 years. So an average of 5,000 new people downloading and using this app every single year. So now in your head, think about, okay, you transport into 2030, you like get in your time machine, get out in 2030, and every campus everywhere has a set of integrated apps like this. Right? This has just become status quo for how students engage with their environment on a college campus. What would the world be like in 10 years if that were true? What would this mean for students? What would it mean for faculty and staff? What would it mean for the way that college campuses were designed? What would it mean for how work gets done? What would it mean for society? I think a lot of you, maybe your brains are going there too. So let's see if we've gotten any early answers coming in. And then everybody else, please feel free to be putting your answers in. They're going to be coming at us pretty fast. It does sound like Big Brother. We get a lot of that from this one too. Definitely there is some tracking happening. I don't think it's more tracking than we already often sign up for every day. But yeah, there's an upside too. Fewer missed opportunities due to forgetfulness. People are seeing an upside on retention rates. But some people are seeing dependence on AI. I think that's true, absolutely. Complete loss of privacy. So we're already starting to see the trade-offs back and forth between AI tracking, between privacy concerns, but also definitely some upside for student support. So Paul, I'll go back to you on this one. What do you see in 10 years as we're watching some of these answers come in?
Yeah, it's interesting as I think about my future here. It runs across the gamut of some of the comments that we're seeing. I see we've heard talk of a zero-stop shop for student engagement and success, right? I see that writ large across the campus in a very real way. And I think that has meaningful implications, especially for equity and for folks who navigating the campus experience may not come naturally or might not be a roadmap. Where even finding the right office to go to for help can sometimes prove an obstacle or a challenge. So I see a kind of an equity bent in my future here in terms of what that student engagement looks like. But I also see the challenges with needing to guard against not just the privacy aspects, but I think I saw folks referencing spontaneous interaction and the idea of an overly prescriptive experience. How do we leave that room for discovery? So I think there's some open questions here, but for me, this is a future I'm working more towards because I see that benefit for all different types of students. And interestingly, there was one comment around increasing anxiety and mental health issues. For me, I actually in my future saw the exact opposite of that, of alleviating some of those concerns by making it that much easier to address some of the challenges that would increase my own anxiety. So that convenience factor, I think, could be useful. So different ways to interpret that signal.
Yeah, well, and I think it's this is part of the interesting part of these conversations, right? Is that we can see often how these signals can open up to a yes and answer to that agency question, right? So it sounds like if I say, is this a future that you want to be an active part in creating? You're already in the yes, but there are some ands, right? Yes, and we need to make sure to design it so that it is more about alleviating stress, alleviating those sort of, I call them life admin challenges that keep students from retaining, like, library fines and parking tickets and register for classes and fill in your FAFSA and all of these things without becoming information overload, which adds to the mental stress. That it's about, you were talking about equity, and I noticed that this one is somebody's thinking about it will make inequities more pronounced. And I think that is to do with the difference in technology. I saw a couple of other responses there, too much reliance on tech, but it makes people who have smartphones or new phones have more access to this engagement than others. So there would need to be a focus on making sure everybody has the right devices. Hey, David, how about you? It's been interesting to watch these answers come in, right? Because this has definitely got multiple facets of, interesting potential here. Is this a future that you are interested in making come about?
I was thinking back to my own undergraduate experience, and I think one of the most important things was learning how to focus, right? How to push out all those distractions and just focus on a lab experiment or on a book or on a paper I had to write. And that was difficult. In any college campus, there are so many opportunities. I worry that this makes it even more difficult. And sure, yeah, you can push pause on your phone, you could turn your phone off, but I imagine sitting there reading a book and my phone's buzzing every couple seconds with the drum circle or with a movie that's on or something like that. And I think we would have to pair this with really helping students find ways to focus. I'm guessing, for me, I don't think there's a technological solution to that. Technology can make it more difficult. I don't think there's a simple way to solve that technologically, but maybe it means we have to train students in these skills, because I do think there would be a benefit. I was not a particularly social person on my college campus, and maybe this would have helped if I knew all the opportunities that were out there at any given moment.
Yeah, and actually, whether they are being bombarded by data in college, they will certainly be bombarded by data as adults. And so I like what you mentioned about there's an opportunity to train students for how to be mindful about setting up a data environment that is conducive to their mental health, to focusing, to being productive in this kind of more staged environment that is a college campus, right? All right, well, speaking of boon to older students, I have one last signal. I think this is a really fun one to think about. So this is from the States. This is ASU. I try to not give too many signals from ASU, but this one is a fun one. ASU has started to talk about what they call, or they start to move forward on what they call the Mirabella Project, which is an on-campus retirement community. I said here with a twist, because already we have seen schools for a while that have been pairing with retirement communities in some way or another. You know, maybe they bought them, but they're off campus, so they partner with them. This is the first time we have seen a university break ground on a retirement community, build it from the ground up, design it as an integrated part of campus life. So seniors who move into Mirabella, they will be allowed to audit classes. We know seniors probably don't want to just take one-off classes, but they're probably interested in continuing to learn, so they can go and sit in on classes. They get a student ID, so they can participate in campus life. They can go to that drum circle. They could, go take out books from the library. You know, you could be going to swim laps and you've got your tour in the lane next to you, but they're integrated into student life or the campus life. But then they also have their own amenities as well, just like in a regular retirement community, around the clock care, cocktail parties that are just for them. Sometimes they just want to be with their peers as well. So this is an interesting one to me too. And I've reset the question so that we can hear a little bit. Sorry that I didn't do that while I was talking about the signal, but please feel free to weigh in now. When you think about 10 years out on this one, so you get in that time machine, you get out, it's 2030, and every university, almost every university has this same kind of retirement community. Oh, and it's a little stuck. I wonder if, there we go. Now we're getting some. We're starting to get some answers. So every single university has a retirement community in addition to, what we think of as traditional campus life. What does that mean for students? What does that mean for faculty or staff, for space, for society, for the way that colleges do work? What kinds of futures are we seeing? It's all coming in fast and furious now. We've got some business-focused folks. We're thinking about revenue streams. We've got some space-focused folks. We're thinking about dorms and auxiliaries. Social change, students learning to interact with seniors, which is continually important as we age as a country. Does certainly have implications for donor relations because your donors are on campus. How about you, David, as you think about this one? Does anything pop into your head what the world would look like in 10 years with this future?
Yeah, I mean, I do think when we read about kind of the epidemic of loneliness, not only among older folks, but even among younger people as well, if you can use this to build those relationships, that could really be transformative. But I was also, at first I thought, you look at that photo you had on the previous slide, this is clearly designed for wealthy individuals, right? This is going to be, and on the one hand, that feels exclusive. On the other hand, we also know there is this transfer of wealth, right? As the baby boomers are aging, they are the wealthiest generation we've ever had. They are, for the most part, refusing to spend more on tax money to fund education for younger people. But maybe this is a way to kind of co-opt them in that process, right? So you don't want to pay taxes, but maybe you'll pay more money to live in this place and maybe you'll sponsor a student while you're there, and maybe you'll donate to some of these. So maybe it's a way both to provide those intergenerational connections, but also intergenerational wealth transfer, which I think we really need to think about in terms of the financial model of the university.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't really ever thought, I've taught a lot and I thought about this as a completely new form of giving almost, right? And a way for us to capture revenue that gets sort of sucked up by other kinds of industries, We've got all of the infrastructure on college campuses. Why not put it to use? All right. Well, I know that we are just a couple of minutes from the end. I've really appreciated seeing all of these answers come in, and we will share these slides and the answers that you gave more widely after the fact. I think we'll probably send them out to everybody who registered. But I wanted to just, first of all, pull up and say, you know, so this was just these kinds of conversations, looking for something that is happening right now that constitutes some sort of change from how things are being done, even if it's kind of like what's going on all over the place, but it's got something a little bit different to it. That could be a signal if you think about, all right, what are the implications in 10 years if this is the way of doing things? And that's this process of identifying and interpreting signals. And that allows us, you can already start to see, to make forecasts. Because what if I came out and said, in 2030, most retirement will happen on college campuses? And then I have started to make a forecast that we can have a discussion about. We can start to build that into scenarios of what the future might look like, and have deeper and deeper discussions that lead to us making decisions about what the future that we want as an organization, as a community of learners and thinkers. What is the future that we want, and how can we build it together? So I leave you, since we are at the hour, with just a couple of words of advice and wisdom from prominent future thinkers. I said the future is here, it's just not very evenly distributed, but also I want to say, so Jim Dater, who is a futurist thinker who is tenured at the University of Hawaii, and this is one of my favorite lines from futurist thinkers, that any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. If I told you a year ago what 2020 was going to hold for us, many of you would have been like, all right, crazy lady, stop watching Star Trek, or whatever, something more dystopian. And that's the world we're in right now. So I encourage you to be creative, to be looking for signals of the future all around you, and to accept the ridiculous too, and think about that as well as you're going through, you know, these discussions about the long-range future vision for your own university. All right, thank you so much for your time today, and good luck to everybody. Bye.